Hello and welcome to The Last Word. Today is the deadline set by the Naxals for resolving the hostage crisis in Orissa. So tonight we ask, how effectively is the state government responding to this challenge? That's with BJD Lok Sabha leader Jai Panda, the former head of the Intelligence Bureau Ajit Doval, the Executive Director of the Institute for Conflict Management, Ajai Sahni, and former Director General of the Border Security Force, E.N. Ram Mohan. Dr. Sahni, let me start with a simple question. As someone who actually is an expert in handling these sorts of things, in your eyes, how effectively is Orissa handling the hostage crisis? Or do you fear that step by steady step, they're giving in to Naxal demands?
Well, I think this is very obvious. They have been giving in to escalating demands. At some stage, I think they will have to put the brakes on. And I would assume that stage is now being approached because now the demands have escalated to including extremely hardcore terrorists, including the man who was responsible for the Malkangiri attack on the Greyhounds, in which 38 security personnel were killed. And another 17 people were killed in another attack engineered by him on a police transport. So they'll have to stop somewhere. But I'd like to go to another thing, that how effective is going to be defined not by a position that a government is able to take in the heart of the crisis. It is the capacity of the government over the years which defines what you can do.
And that capacity hasn't been built up not just by Orissa, but by any state in India.
Not by any state in India, and certainly not by Orissa in the last 1 year after the Vinil Krishna abduction.
So as a result of failing to build capacity, you're not impressed with their performance today?
They cannot have an effective performance. You can't reinvent yourself in the middle of a hostage crisis.
Ajit Doval, some people would say that the Orissa government has no alternative but to release the Naxals that it's arrested over the years, because otherwise the MLA and the Italian tour operator would simply be killed. Do you agree with that view, or is that an oversympathetic interpretation?
I think it is oversympathetic. After all, the basic definition of the state is that it has the monopoly of using the coercive method through legal means. If it surrenders that, it loses its legitimacy to govern. If by using caution, any adversary is able to dictate its terms, it is undoing of the concept of the state. But let me add one more thing, Karan. It is not the Orissa government. It is the total government, the central government, the state government, and everybody who is responsible for it. At this point of time, in crises like that, you cannot single out one state. What has the entire state security apparatus, the nation security apparatus, responded to this threat and taken the countermeasures to vacate these hostages?
That's a very fair point, and I'd like to say very clearly to the audience that although we're talking about a hostage crisis in Orissa and therefore we'll be focusing primarily on the Orissa government, the problem that we're highlighting is one that all state governments in a similar situation would face, including the central government, as it famously did during the Kandahar crisis and even earlier when VP Singh was Prime Minister. But for a moment, Jai Panda, let's focus on your government in Orissa. The problem, as you heard Dr. Sahni say, is that each time your government has been prepared to release Naxal prisoners or members of the Chasi Mulya Adivasi Sangh, the Naxals have simply enhanced their demands one step further. They're doing it again this evening as we talk. So rather than resolve the situation by giving in, are you in fact whetting their appetite for more?
Well, Karan, with humility, I would not like to make a specific comment on this because we are at a very critical juncture. As you know, there has been a deadline for the hostages which ends tonight, and I wouldn't like to say anything that could possibly jeopardize or aggravate the situation. But I will respond to the broader question. Negotiations, as has been pointed out by the other speakers before me, is an issue that requires policy decision not just in Orissa but in other states. But also let's keep in mind that even states and countries that do have a policy of not negotiating are often compelled to do so, Israel being a point in case. Beyond that, there was a point about the capabilities of Orissa to deal with Naxalite violence. If there are specific suggestions or specific comments, I can respond to that.
Okay.
But the trend over the, but it's very important to point out that over the last 4 years, the trend has shown a decrease of Naxalite violence in Orissa.
Okay.
That couldn't have happened on autopilot. Obviously, there has been some capabilities at play.
I take your point, and it's a fair point if that trend is actually a true trend. I'll come in a moment's time to the consequences and lessons of this time round. But first, Mr. Ramon, let me put this to you. Would you accept that over 60 years, the essential strength and ability of the Indian state, and by which I mean all our state governments and the central government, to stand up to such crises simply hasn't been developed and established? So when you do have a crisis, as Orissa is showing today, states simply capsize because they don't know how to stand up.
I would entirely agree with you, Mr. Thapa. You see, I have done training in insurgency as a young officer, and I have quite some experience of counterinsurgency in Assam, Manipur, and then in Kashmir. There is a clear fundamental rule that you never negotiate with a terrorist. I can only give you the illustration of what happened in West Germany.
Can I interrupt? Do you mean never negotiate, or do you mean not give in to demands? Surely talking to terrorists in the hope that you can find a solution is essential, because that keeps a door open. I think what you mean is you never give in to their demands and capsize.
That's right, yes. You should not give in to, see, for example, if somebody is hijacked, somebody is kidnapped, there is no question of negotiating with them to release him, and particularly to release people whom you have arrested. But I have a different take on this whole issue.
Very quickly, what is it?
I would like you to give me a little time to explain this. You see, in any insurgency, you have to answer one very fundamental question. Why have civilians taken to the gun?
Forgive me.
There must be some very good reason for this.
Absolutely. I'll stop you there, because actually you're going into the question of what is it that creates insurgency, what is it that leads to hostage taking. That's a different issue. I'll come to that in a moment's time. I want for a moment to focus on the crisis at hand and the handling of that crisis. Dr. Sahni, let's come to the consequences of the approach that the Orissa government is adopting today, but it is also the approach that Vajpayee adopted in the Kandahar crisis, is the approach that Mr. VP Singh adopted when he came to power. By releasing prisoners that you hold in exchange for the lives of hostages, you may resolve the issue at hand, but you end up encouraging further hostage taking, and rather than secure yourself, you make yourself vulnerable in the future.
Yes and no. Simply a no negotiating policy globally has not resulted in a complete end to hostage taking. And in fact, states which have a no negotiation or a declared no negotiation policy have repeatedly negotiated and conceded.
Israel's a classic example. They always trade when their own security is at stake.
Absolutely.
I mean, their own
they
security
traded.
stuff.
Let's just see. One man was exchanged for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners, including 280 people serving life sentences. So Israel's done it. I want to answer your original question. What matters is not the actual resolution of the hostage crisis. What matters is the overall counterterrorism capability thereafter. Terrorists will be encouraged to repeat this method if they feel that there are no subsequent consequences. If there are subsequent consequences and tremendous cost inflicted on them, then they will abandon all instrumentalities of terrorism. You cannot focus on just one instrumentality of terrorism and say, if I do this with hostage situations, they will end. No.
Let me, Ajit Doval, come back to the present situation. I know we don't have the full instrumentality for handling terror that Dr. Sahni is talking about, but in this instance, are we, by releasing prisoners and an escalating number each time the demand goes up, demoralizing the very police force who we're going to have to rely on hereafter to fight the same Nakshals? Is that a serious consequence, that people will feel that policemen lost their lives in the past in vain? Their kith and kin will say, why did our near and dear ones die?
This is absolutely one of the consequences that we should be extremely sensitive about. If the police is demoralized or decides not to act with full vigor, then probably we will have more of these incidents. But there is another important point in this crisis, and which is applicable to other hostage situations. When we start negotiating, it is not necessarily that we are bargaining. It is that we are using the time to save the lives and build up our ground capabilities in the interim period to develop intelligence, deploy our forces, find a position ourselves for a counteraction.
Sure.
What has been done in last 15 days? What has been the progress on that point? Are we now on today's date in a better position to counter or vacate the kidnapping?
And
now, in this particular case, the center's role is very important,
Quite
as
right.
also the state government.
But
they could have done a lot of things in 15 days, and Kandahar is no comparison.
Quite
Kandahar
right.
was on a foreign soil,
Well,
where the demand had come
let's
from
not
33 to 2.
let's not confuse the
So let us
situation.
not get into that.
Let's not
In
confuse
this-
the situation by comparing with Kandahar. Kandahar, in many people's
Point
eyes,
is this,
was
that is today
capitulation
they
by
should
the
be
central
under
government. So I'm
pressure.
not bringing that in. Let me bring in.
Let
Let me bring in Jai Panda. Let me bring in Jai Panda. So I'll come back to you. Jai Panda, I want to stick for a moment to the consequences of what is happening, and I'm emphasizing that Orissa is only the latest example. We've had other state governments that behave similarly, and the central government at least twice in Vajpayee's time and VP Singh's time also caved in. But this time around, in your specific instance, would you accept that another consequence of releasing prisoners and Nakshals in a hostage crisis is that you might give the police an idea that maybe next time they come up against Nakshals, they shouldn't take them prisoners. Worse still, they should actually shoot and kill them so that there are no prisoners to be released when there's a future hostage crisis. That, in a sense, could be the unintended message you're sending the same police force.
Let us be very clear that irrespective of what is finally done, there will be consequences either way. And yes, we have to be extremely sensitive to the police morale and the special operations group that have been working towards this. And certainly the state government is not going to take any decisions lightly. But I would like to point out that you must see shades of grey, because everyone who is in jail today facing some charges is not in it for murder or conspiracy to murder. There are some people who are there on lesser charges, and we do know that in the Indian system, even for minor offences, sometimes people take years to go through the court process. I think in terms of expediting the court process for those who are accused of minor violations is something that could be considered as not jeopardizing the morale of either the police or the special operations group.
You say that. Let me bring in the former Director General of the BSF who's with us. Mr. Rammohan, would you accept that it's not as big a lapse on the part of a state government if all they do is expedite the court process of people with minor charges? In other words, these are not hardened Nakshals who've been taken prisoner who are being released, but people who are minor offenders. Would you accept that distinction, or would you say it's a spurious distinction?
No, I'm very clear on it. We never negotiate with a terrorist. You are notwithstanding the example of Israel, where they were prepared to get back their soldier after years of captivity by releasing more than 100 odd Palestinian prisoners, and some of them involving in major crimes. In my book, this is not there. I have had 2 occasions in Kashmir on this issue, and in both cases I refused to negotiate.
So you're saying to me that you would not negotiate all the way to the point that the people taken hostage are possibly killed. Would you go that far, Mr. Rammohan?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, let's take a break at that point and come back and ask, does the Indian political system and Indian politicians per se permit a stand that goes all the way to the point where hostages get killed? Or is that something our psyche, our culture and our public response simply will not permit? Worse still, our press might not accept. That's the subject in a moment's time. See you after the break.